Well, Nathan Betts is coming up here in a moment, and he is part of the RZIM office here in Toronto. And he's going to be speaking on a topic, Trust is the Question. And Nathan is a speaker, and his heart is for youth and young people to learn and understand what it means to defend your faith. And just a couple things about Nathan here as he's coming. Nathan has a family here in Toronto with him. His favorite color is blue, even though he's not proving that to us today. And apparently his favorite cereal is Captain Crunch. That's what I heard. That's anyone a fan of that too? Can we relate to Nathan this morning? Awesome. Can we please give a hand to Nathan Betts?
Hey, look, thanks so much, Matt. Look, it is such a treat to have all of you here today. I think we have people from Buffalo too, and also Montreal. I want to let you know, for the Montrealers, we will be taking questions, get this, in French. Okay, not really. No, we're not doing that. I'm the sole Canadian on the panel, and my French is very un peu. Hey, look at that. It's French. There's French there for you. No, it is such a treat to have you all here with us today. As was mentioned, my name is Nathan Betts, and when I think of big deal questions, well, actually, let me back up here. When you think of big deal questions, tough questions, questions that, as I've said throughout the past couple months, that actually keep you up at night, what do you think of? What are the questions that really, really naggle at you, that really you want answers to? Now, for me, when I think of tough questions, I think of a flight I once traveled on from London, England, to New York. This was years ago. It was Christmas time. I was heading back. I was living in England at the time, and I was heading back to Toronto for Christmas. And if you've ever been to an airport at Christmas time, you know this much. You don't want to do that again. You don't want to go to an airport at Christmas time. It's just busy. It's hectic. Are you with me? Okay, has anyone ever been to an airport at Christmas? Okay, you don't want to do that again. Anyway, I finally got to the airport. I checked in my luggage. I got my ticket. I went to down the boarding gate, got on the airplane, and it was a big airplane. It was like 3 seats, then 6 seats, then 3 seats. And I was the lucky one to be sat at the back. And I was in the middle section of the back part of the airplane. I get in, I put my luggage in the overhead compartment, and I sit down and I get my headphones down just to, I'm about to enter that place of peace and tranquility. When I hear this guy walking down the aisle, and he's sort of a big guy, he's a tall, burly guy, and he doesn't really know what it means to have an indoor voice. Are you with me? He just has one voice, and it's at a very loud level. And he approaches, he keeps walking towards the back, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've got bad luck, okay? I don't have the greatest luck, but I thought, there's no way my luck is so bad this guy's going to be sitting next to me on the airplane. But lo and behold, he sits next to me. And as I said, he was a big guy, so as soon as he sat down, my seat just propped forward like that. And I was just about to put the headphones in my ear when he nudged me on the shoulder, and he said, and he started asking me all these questions, like questions that you would never think someone would actually ask you just like without knowing you. He said, okay, what's your name? I want to know your name. Where are you from? Where are you traveling to? What do you do? What is it that you do? What are your mom and dad? What are their names? What do they do? Your brothers and sisters, how many do you have? What do they do? And all these questions I was answering for him. And whether I wanted to know it or not, he told me all those details about himself before we had even left the runway in England. But something really interesting happened when I told him what I did for work at that point. Now, at that point, I was interning, I was working for the European office of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, and I was explaining to him how this was a Christian organization. And he stopped me, and he said, hold on, do you really believe all that stuff in the Bible? To which I said, well, yes, and he cut me off. And he said, hold on, but you don't really believe all that stuff about, in the beginning, about God creating the heavens and the earth. You don't really believe all that now, do you? And I said, well, yes, I do. He cut me off again. And then he said, hold on, but what about later? What about Jesus, all this stuff about Jesus being God? You don't really believe all that. Now, do you? And he just asked question after question after question. And his voice got louder. There was a crescendo to his voice. He just got louder and louder and louder. And I looked to the passengers on my right, And then I looked at the passengers on my left, and I noticed that they were leaning in to me, waiting to hear what I would say when there was a space and time to answer the question. So I looked at the guy and I said, look, you've got lots of questions. Why don't we take just one question and go down the list, but the burning question, the question that you would say, okay, I've read this in Scripture and I have an issue with it. We've got to talk about that. And he looked at me, very puzzled. And he said, hold on, the issue in Scripture that I have read? And I said, yes, yeah, the issue in Scripture that you have read. He looked at me and said, I've never read the Bible. Why would I ever read the Bible? You insult me even by assuming that I've read the Bible. I would never read that book. The Bible is rubbish. And I said, hold on, you're criticizing something that you've never engaged with. You've never read. And I could tell he didn't really understand what I was saying. So I looked at him and I said, look, think about it like this. Now, just a few minutes ago when we were giving each other, doing the introductions, he told me that as his, living, his profession, he shot wildlife films around the world. So I said, look, think about it like this. You come to me and you say, Nathan, what do you think of this film that I just did in South Africa? This wildlife film. What do you think of it? And I say to you, what do I think of it? I think it is rubbish. I think it is the worst thing I've ever even heard of. Whoever did that movie has the brain the size of a pea. What would you think? Well, you'd look to me and you would say, what part of the film did you not like? What scene did you not like? What if I said to you, what part of the film did I not like? I never watched the film. I never watched the film. Why would I ever watch that film? And for the first time in this conversation, he stopped, he paused, and he didn't say anything. Now, why do I tell you the story? Well, here's why I tell you the story. Because I found out just by asking questions. I didn't really answer his questions. I just asked questions to his questions. I found out that he was angry. He was obviously angry, but he wasn't angry with the Bible. He was angry at the church. He was actually angry at Christians. He had been hurt and offended. He was angry at Christianity, not the Bible. And what I'd like to say to you, just as we start here, is that questions I've found come to us from two different levels. They can come to us from an emotional level. Now, in this case with the guy, my friend in the airplane, his question was coming from an emotional standpoint. He had been hurt. He'd been offended. And so questions can come to us from that heart level standpoint. But they can also be intellectual. The starting point for questions can be intellectual, driven by intellectual curiosity, questions of the mind. Recently I was actually talking to another friend of mine who was asking me questions about the Bible. And there came a point in the conversation when he looked to me and he said, Nathan, I want you to give me 100% absolute proof that God exists. Give me 100% absolute proof that God exists. Now, how's that for a question? How's that for an objection? Now, if that's you, if you have a question like that, you say, look, I want 100% absolute proof that God exists. I want to just say a couple things here. And the first thing is this. The question in that objection is slightly flawed. It's slightly flawed, but let me explain. When we talk about proof for things in life, and what we're asking for is we want to know whether or not the thing is true. What we're really asking for there is actually evidence. Because in all fields of life, fields of study, we're not really asking for proof. Only in certain fields of mathematics do we find absolute proof, like a 2 + 2 = 4. Even in the sciences, we're looking for clues, signposts, hints. Another word for this is just evidence. Now, in Christianity, we take all this evidence, whether it be from the sciences, from morality, the laws that govern what is right or wrong, history, our personal experience. We take it all together. And in Christianity, we can say, look, looking at all the evidence, this is true. This is true. So that is why I say to you that the question of demanding absolute proof for God's existence is slightly flawed, because what we're looking for are actually clues and evidence. But more than that, the reason why this whole objection of asking for God's proof, the proof of God's existence, is that God is not a set of ideas. He's not an idea to be understood. He's a person to be known. God is not a set of ideas to be understood. He is a person to be known. And so this leads us to one of the most fundamental, but also, I think, one of the most attractive claims of Christianity, that God is a person to be known, and he longs for a relationship, a personal relationship. And just think for a moment, when you're talking to your friends, you might be having a cup of coffee or whatever you have with your friends, and you say, prove to me that Johnny over there actually exists. Okay, has anyone ever done that? Just by show of hands. Has anyone ever said, I want you to prove to me that other friend exists? No. Okay, I see one hand. We have professional psychiatric help for people like you. Okay, no, just kidding. No, we'll pray for you, though. No, just kidding. The thing is this. When we're talking about friends, we ask questions that go beyond proof. We ask questions like, hey, why do you enjoy spending time with that person? Why do you like her? Why do you like him? Do you trust him? Do you trust her? Now, when we get into conversations about relationships, friendships, we face a huge problem I want to suggest to you. And the problem is trust. Now, please listen closely now. I've got a couple questions for you. Have you ever been disappointed before? Have you ever been let down? Maybe it's someone who you trust, you really thought, hey, here's someone I can really trust. Here's someone I can bank on. Whether it could be a friend, it could be someone really close to you, it could be a teacher. Why do I ask you those questions? Because if you have been let down, that leads to broken trust. We lose trust in that person. And I've talked to many people recently that it's not only anyone, it's actually anything. It's technology. We've placed our trust maybe in a gadget or maybe even things on through social media, and they've let us down. So we don't trust anything or anyone now. And this is a problem because we've lost trust in God. We find it very hard to trust in God. Recently I was talking to a friend of mine who grew up in Iran. She was born in Iran, and she left in the 70s with her family and came to Canada. And she had experienced firsthand abuse and manipulation from different people involved in different religions. Now, I remember talking to her recently. She said, I don't trust anyone. If anyone is associated with religion, I don't want to have anything to do with them. I don't trust them. And I looked to her and I said, okay, I understand why you don't trust anyone associated with religion. But let me ask you this. Who do you trust? Who do you trust? And without hesitation, she looked at me and she said, who else can I trust? I can only trust myself. I'm the only person who I can trust. Now, I want you to just think about that question for a moment. And I actually want to get a bit interactive here. I want you to talk to someone close to you, the next person to you, and ask them this question. Who do you trust? Now, you also have my permission to not answer that question. If you think, hey, no, Nathan, this is too personal, that's fine. But it's a good question for us to think about. Who do we really trust? It could be parents, could be mom, dad, could be a pastor, could be a friend, could be a teacher. It could be God. It could actually be just yourself, like my friend. Who do you trust? So I just want you to take a moment and talk to someone next to you and ask them this question. Who do you trust? Go to it. Okay, let's bring it back now. I think we've had a chance to talk about it. How'd that go? How did it go? Anyone want to shout out any answers? Of course, we don't want to get too personal here. We don't want to put anyone in an uncomfortable spot, but who do you trust? Who do we trust? Jesus? Mom? Okay. Yep. Ourself? Nobody? Best friend? Okay. There are loads of answers, but actually this is interesting. Best friend, some Jesus, others are mom. For others, no one. For others, it's ourselves. Now, I can sense that maybe some of you here might be saying, Nathan, why are we talking about this? And why are we talking about trust? I thought this was a day for questions. We can bring all the questions. Here's why. Here's why I'm talking about trust here. Because at the center of all the questions being asked today lies this issue of trust. Just think for a moment. This day, we'll have Michelle Tepper. She's going to be speaking to you about the problem of pain. Where is God when it hurts? Where is God when it hurts? Later on, near the end of the day, she's going to be coming back to us and talking to us about relationships and sexuality. Cameron McAllister is going to be talking to us about God. Is God optional? These are massive issues. But here's the thing. At the end of it, you actually might, even after all the questions are asked and responded to in the last Q&A, you might actually get maybe all of your questions answered today. But this question still needs to be answered. Will you trust him? Will you trust this God? Now, what I like to do in the next few minutes, the next few moments we have here, is I want to look at why we've lost trust in God and what Christianity has to say about that. Why we've lost trust in God and what Christianity has to say to that. The first thing is this. Now, there are many reasons, I think, why we have trouble trusting in God. But I think one of the reasons is because we have a faulty understanding of who God is. Just think about that. Have you ever asked yourself the question, who is God? Who really is this God? Now, if you have, I think when I've talked to people, I found that many people think the Christian God is just this cosmic bully. This being that's up in the sky who is big and he is in control, but he's ready to pounce on us with a big stick if we do something wrong. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the name Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is a well-known atheist. He's written a book called The God Delusion. And I remember him saying at one point that I do not want to believe in a God who is mean, nasty, vindictive, and brutish. How's that? Now, when I first heard those words, I actually thought he said, I do not want to believe in a God who is mean, nasty, vindictive, and British. And I thought to myself, hey, I could sort of get into this idea. Fish and chips, British chocolate, afternoon tea, crumpets, hey. But that's not what he was saying. That is not what he was saying. Mean, nasty, vindictive, and brutish. Here's the thing. I agree with him. That is not the Christian God. The Christian God is not a cosmic bully. So if that's not you, you don't think God's a cosmic bully, you might think he's sort of this Bruce Almighty, as I like to call him, this Bruce Almighty type of God. Now, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Bruce Almighty, but in it, it stars Jim Carrey, and in it, God is portrayed as one who just gives us what we want when we want it. We called him, and he knows what we need, and he just gets down to it, and he gives us what we want when we want it. I want to tell you today that also is not the Christian God. That is not the one we see and read of in the Bible. The Christian God is not a cosmic bully. He is not Bruce Almighty type of God. Who is the Christian God? Who is the Christian God, and what is he like? Now, to help us understand who God is and what he's like, I'd like to tell you a story that actually took place thousands of years ago. It's found in the Bible, if you know it. It's found in a book called Exodus, and it's so old, it's categorized as being part of ancient Near Eastern literature. That's old. It's a story about followers of God in Egypt, and they were called the Israelites. And at one point, this group was so small. They were small to, say, moderate-sized group. They were sort of a type of extended family living in Egypt. But they grew. They grew to be a great group of people. They were a nation-sized group of people living in Egypt. There was a problem. Many people in Egypt, Egyptians, did not like this. They started hating the Israelites. And the ruler of Egypt at the time, the Pharaoh, hated them so much, he authorized a law that put these Israelites into slavery. So here we have it, the story of God's people, called the Israelites. They felt trapped in Egypt. And they felt it because they were trapped. They were really trapped in Egypt. They cried out to God out of their pain. And here's the thing. God responded. God acted. And what I want to do is I just want to look at a few terms that are used in the story that describe God's actions, because I think those descriptions tell us something of who he is and what he is like. The first term that is used is that God heard. God heard. Now, what I find really interesting about this story is that, well, originally it was written in the Hebrew language. And the Hebrew language is actually far more powerful than what we have in translation. What this term, God heard, actually means is that God has heard and he has responded. God has heard and he has responded. What does that tell us? It tells us that the Christian God, when he listens, he acts. When the Christian God listens, he acts. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with someone in which you're telling them a story, and you can tell they're listening, but the story really is actually being told by you to get them to do something about it. And they might be listening, but they're not doing anything about it. And it makes you think, hey, if you're really getting the story, you'd be doing something, you'd be responding. The amazing news of the Christian God is that when he listens, he acts. I lived in England. I had the opportunity to live in England for 4 years, 2 of which were spent in Oxford, England, and that's where I met my wife. Everybody say, ah. Okay, that's good. Let's try that again. Okay, that's better. That's a bit better. We'll work on that. Now, we had a meal at a restaurant. We were walking down one of the streets there to the bus stop when we were actually harassed. A group of people started to harass us and ask us and then demand money from us. And they started pushing us around, and it became actually, I was afraid. And I saw someone walking past us, and I looked at him and said, look, can you help? Do you see what's happening? They're trying to beat us up. And this guy, without exaggeration, I think I could have been a ghost to this guy. He didn't even look at me. He didn't respond. He didn't do anything. He just walked straight past me. And then a couple minutes later, I saw another guy who I didn't know. And I called out to him, and I said, look, do you see what's happening? I really need we need help. Do you see what's happening? They're trying to beat us up. And this guy said, call the police. And I was so paralyzed with fear, I forgot the emergency number at the time. In England, it's 999. Here, it's 911. I forgot the number. And so I called back to him. I said, what's the number? And he just kept going along. And I saw a guy who was in a kebab van. Now, in England, they have these wonderful things called kebab vans. They're sort of the North American equivalent to French fry trucks or the sausage vendor guys. I saw this guy. He was behind the counter, and I charged over to him and I said, look, do you see what's happening? My girlfriend and I, they're trying to beat us up. They want money from us. He charged out of that kebab van like a shot. He split up the group, and Brittany and I, my wife, we just darted off and got a taxi out of there. Why do I tell the story? I tell you the story because it gives us a picture of what God is like. When God listens, he acts. God heard. But more than that, God saw. God saw the people of Israel, these Israelites, in their pain. He saw them. Why does this matter? Why does this matter to us? Because one of our default settings in life, especially when we're going through hard situations, is to think or feel that no one understands us. No one gets me. No one understands what I'm about. No one understands my situation. This story of the Christian God tells us that actually no, God gets you. He understands you. God saw the people of Israel. God heard, God saw, and he knew. We have this idea of a God of compassion. The Christian God is one of compassion. Now, have you ever asked yourself what that word means? What does compassion really mean? Now, here's the interesting thing about the word compassion. It is a compound word. It first means to pass moral judgment upon something, meaning you see something to be wrong. You can identify something to be wrong. Like, say, for instance, racism. You see that to be wrong, but compassion does not stop there. It moves you so deep within, it causes you to do something about it. Compassion is this. You see something wrong, it moves you so deep within, you do something about it. And that word describes who God is. God of compassion. He knew. He not only sees, he acts. So why do I tell you the story of these Israelites in Egypt and God's response? I tell it to you because it tells us who God is and what he is like. He hears us. He acts. He sees us. He understands us. And he is a God of compassion. The same God that we're reading of here and talking about here in this story that took place thousands of years ago is the same God of whom we are speaking to you today. He sees you. He knows you. He loves you. He really loves you. There's a book in the Bible called the Psalms. And in it, there's one writer who has actually, he's written many of the chapters in the Psalms, a guy named David. And in the 139th Psalm, this is what he says. Please listen here. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Why do I tell this story? Because it tells us something of who God is. But there's more. From this story, I realized that actually that's us, that's you and me, we aren't actually that different to the people way back, thousands of years ago in Egypt, these Israelites in Egypt. Now, we might immediately say, well, yeah, except Nathan, well, we're not in slavery. That's the obvious one. Sorry to point out the obvious here, but we aren't in slavery. I want to suggest to you that actually we are in slavery, not to governor or a government, nothing like that, but we are in slavery to a power that is just as real. And that power is sin. Now, before you sort of start thinking, oh gosh, okay, now he's going to start talking about sin, and oh, this is so complicated, what does this even mean? I want to suggest to you first that yes, okay, there's a lot of religious baggage that often we carry behind this word called sin. But I just want to give you a shorthand definition here of what sin is. Sin is a type of illness. It's a type of disease that has affected everything in this world. That means even us. Now, it's easy for us to look, it really is actually quite simple for us to look around the world and say, oh yeah, okay, I can see how actually this world is messed up. It's broken. It's got problems. But here's the thing. Sin has impacted everything. That's even including us. In the beginning of the Bible, there's a story told of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and they had this perfect personal relationship with God. But there came a point at which they decided to disobey God. And this act of disobedience brought sin into the world. Now, here's another thing about sin. This power blocks us from having this personal relationship with God. So we effectively have become slaves to this power. It's a type of prison that we are in. Now, in the case of the Israelites, God sent them a deliverer. If you know the story at all, a guy named Moses was sent by God to take this large group of people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, out of a place of slavery into a good place, another land that would provide freedom. For us, God has also done something about it. God has actually sent us a deliverer. Now, I just want to stop there for a moment. I want to interact again. Now just think about here for a moment, okay? We've got a problem here. We're under this power of sin that has actually blocked us from God. We need help. If you were God, okay? Work with this for a second. If you were God, how would you solve the problem? If you were God, how would you somehow make a way so that humanity, we could have a personal relationship with Him again? I want you to talk to the person next to you and ask them this question. Hey, if you were God, how would you solve this problem? How do you make it so that we can have a relationship with God again? Just take a minute, talk to the person next to you, ask them this question. Okay, let's bring it back here. Any answers that you feel are notable, you want to shout out, just go for it. Shout it out. What would you do if you were God? You needed to solve this problem. We are blocked from having a relationship with God. How do you solve it? Anything? Anybody? Sorry? Yeah, remove what's blocking it. Okay, let's keep going. What else? Anything? Okay, break the chain, someone said. Okay, so now there's only 2 responses here out of about 300 people. Do you see why we're not God? Okay, no, that was a joke. That was sort of, half serious, half. Okay. Any other answers? Yep. Okay, send missionaries, send people to help. Yep. Okay, go to them. Okay, now here's the thing. What's your name? Jared? Okay, we've got to get you something for that because that was the money answer there. Now here's the thing. Religions, other systems of belief, faiths, have sought to actually solve this problem. They solve it by instructing us to do certain things, whether it be acts of goodwill or compassion, do certain things, and by just becoming a better person, somehow we can make our way to God. So we get to God somehow by actually just doing good things. Other systems of belief would say that actually it's what you know. You need to know certain ideas, principles, what you know, and by knowing certain things, by meditating on certain principles, that will somehow bring you close to God. Christianity is different. It's not like that. In order for our relationship to be restored and repaired, in order for us to come to God, God comes to us. In order for us to come to God, God comes to us. He gave us his Son, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, God in human flesh, came to our world in our space and time. He came, he died on a cross, breaking and defeating that power of sin that blocked us from having a relation with God so that we could actually relate to God personally. That is the amazing news of Christianity. God sent a deliverer for those people way back, the Israelites, in the person of Moses. God has actually given us a deliverer. And he could have done other things. He could have actually said, hey, you know what? Try better. Just try to do things better. Or just know these things, know these thoughts, know these ideas. No, he gave us himself. That's what makes the story of Christianity so beautiful. Let me say that one more time. In order for us to come to God, God has come to us. I want to tell you a story. And a story about when I worked for the Toronto Blue Jays. When I was doing my undergraduate studies here in Toronto, I worked for the Toronto Blue Jays ground crew. I love baseball. I love the Toronto Blue Jays. And on the ground crew, I mean, we did various things, some entertaining things. If you've been to a baseball game, you will see the ground crew run out in the fifth inning and we'll clean the bases and do all that in just 1 minute. It's pretty remarkable. I still think it's something to talk about. But actually, most of our days were taken up with working on the field, just like this. You were working with dirt, working with clay. That's what we were doing. And it was a messy job, you know, and very meticulous, really detailed. We would be filling in each cleat hole that was made by players the previous day, repairing the clay, repairing the base dirt. And my boss, his name was Tom, really nice guy. He, most of the day, would be working up in the offices where the president of the Blue Jays worked and the general manager. He'd be in those offices. Now, the ground crew, you know, we wore, you know, track pants and running shoes and a Blue Jays t-shirt. But we called those guys in the offices, we called them affectionately the suits. And if we ever saw, you know, the president come down, we'd say, hey, look, we've got a suit. We've got a suit coming down here. And Tom, my boss, he dressed accordingly when he was in the office. He would wear dress pants, dress shoes, dress shirt, collared shirt. And he'd come down maybe an hour or two before we were done, and he would just inspect the work and see, okay, how are things coming along? Do I need to help? And within a few minutes, he would have gone back, after inspecting the work, he would have gone back to the ground crew room, changed, and come out, and he's in our clothing, you know, in running shoes, track pants, t-shirt. And he would be, you know, repairing, the pitcher's mound or home plate with clay, getting his hands dirty. And so when we came off the field and the players entered for batting practice, the field was ready, it was groomed perfectly. Tom would come off the field with us, and he would look just like one of us. His hands would be red, you know, from that clay. His t-shirt would, often like ours, be covered in baseball dirt, shoes with clay all over them. He was the boss. He worked in those offices with the president, with the general manager. But he always came down to field level and worked with us on the field. Why do I tell you the story? I tell you the story because it's just a small picture of what the God of the Bible is like. God has seen. He sees. He has seen that we needed help. And he comes to us. He has come to us in the person of Jesus Christ, God in human flesh, to help us. Who is the Christian God? Who is the Christian God? He is one who sees you. He has heard you. And he acts. He demonstrates his compassion. Now, what I found is when we come to this issue of trust, what I found is the more I get to know this God, the more I know him, the more I can trust him. Probably one of the most important questions you can ask yourself today is, do you actually know this God? Do you actually know this God? I'm convinced that the more you know him, the more you will trust him. Thanks very much for listening. I think, Matt, I don't know if you want to take it, or I don't know if we have any time for questions.
I think we have time if there is a question for Nathan based on his topic. Can we give him a hand of appreciation for this? Thank you, Nathan. We have time for one question. Does anyone have anything? Just put your hand up. If not, well, I have something, Nathan, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Just being at the back of the room when you gave the first discussion, interaction time, and it was about who do you trust, I heard a lot of, no one, but I heard a lot of depends, all these different things. So for someone right now, you just spoke about who God is to them. For someone who has a hard time, difficulty with trust, what could you tell them is their next step?
Great question. I think one of the most practical next steps you can take today, let me say a couple things. One is if you came with a church group, if you came with a youth leader, I would suggest you talking to them. I think one of the greatest ways by which we get to know God, to trust him, is actually by talking to people who really have really encountered God, who really know him personally. So I'd probably say as a next step, talk to your youth leader. That's the thing about trust, and that's the thing about questions. Don't bury them. That's the last thing we want you to do. That's also the beauty of Christianity. If you have doubts, if you are having trouble trusting God, don't bury that thought, because at some point it's going to come up for air. Ask the question. So even today, the practical next step is talk to us. Michelle, Cameron, myself, Dave Lombardo is here. There are people here. We would be so happy to talk to you. So don't feel like you're, I don't know if they have time. No, we've got time. This is the point of today, to have that chance to talk to you one-on-one. We'd be happy to do that. So I think that's probably one of the most practical next steps. Just talk to your youth leader. You can talk to us today.
Yeah. Nathan, one more appreciation for him. Awesome. Awesome.